Later in the service, Irene's going to be preaching about the mystical mindset, finding connection without losing your grip. And one of the themes that you'll hear in her sermon is that, on the one hand, transcendental experiences can catalytically deepen spiritual practice. Seeking big, open, unitive experiences that's what gets many of us on the spiritual path in the first place, wanting to get out of our heads and transcend our egos. It's like what the monk said to the hot dog vendor. I know some of you know this. Make me one with everything. All right. Dad jokes aside, there's a lot of related words about the experiences we're referring to. By far, the most common term you hear today is spiritual, but paranormal and religious are also used to refer to these mystical experiences. Other synonyms are awe and transcendent and mystical, self-transcendent, peak, ecstatic, or if you want to be fancy and you're a religious nerd, you can say numinous. If you look at the inspirations section that's on the last page of your order of service, you'll see that the first lines in our new UU Values and Covenant about our inspirations are direct experiences of transcending mystery and wonder that are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. These experiences can be sacred, they can be from spiritual practices from the various world's religions, or they can be secular. We can transcend ourselves sometimes just by turning a corner and being enraptured in awe at nature, or by getting caught up in the flow of artistic creativity or sports or other related activities. Related to our own Unitarian Universalist history, that reference to transcending mystery and wonder is also a shout out to our transcendentalist forebears, so Emerson and Thoreau and Margaret Fuller and so many others who in the early to mid 19th century were seeking these self-transcending experiences both through nature and through exploring the world's religions. That was kind of the pivot there in the mid 19th century when our movement began pivoting from being about liberal Christianity to being about all the world's religions. In 1844, The Dial, the Transcendentalist journal, was the first place to publish a version of the Lotus Sutra translated into English. And when Thoreau was living on Walden Pond, he took with him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. So fast forwarding to today, when researchers study, what do we mean when we talk about mystical or numinous or all these words? What are we talking about? Four of the most common characteristics cross-culturally and across the world's religions are that these mystical experiences they're about unity, they're about an experience of oneness with all reality. Make me one with everything. They're about ecstasy, some experience of a heightened positive mood. They're about timelessness, your usual sense of space and time drop away. And of course, Einstein said with physics, shows us that's all relative anyway. And then they're ineffable. There's a sense that this experience cannot be adequately described with words. Relatedly, I love this graphic from the researchers just down the road a piece at the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research that traces how various practices can shift us from our normal and arguably false sense of separateness from one another and from the world into a profound sense of what our UU value of interdependence calls the interdependent web of all existence. Again, on the back of your order of service, you'll see interdependence as one of our UU values. Who was here for Reverend Sarah's sermon last week? Okay, a number of you. Linking back to that, Einstein said that his study of physics revealed that we humans experience ourselves and our thoughts and our feelings as something separated from the rest, but that is merely an optical delusion of consciousness. We're not really separate. It's an optical delusion of consciousness. The truth that the science of physics is showing us is that reality is deeply interdependent. That scientific view resonates with my own firsthand experiences with mysticism. It's one of the core insights that's come out of my own Buddhist meditation practice. It is that reality is process and relationship all the way down. It's process and relationship all the way down. And such shifts into egolessness and interdependence can be profoundly liberating, connecting, and healing. So, okay, we've been talking about all the positive good stuff, but it's also important to add that on the other hand, some of these big, open, powerful mystical experiences can also be profoundly unmooring. Experiences of groundlessness can trigger anxiety and other big negative emotions that can be difficult to navigate, especially if you're trying to do all this stuff on your own. So Irene's also going to be talking about perspectives and practices for approaching the numinous as safely as possible. There's a reason that the word meditation and medication are etymologically related. Among other things, dosage matters. If you dramatically increase your dosage of meditation, and some people do this, they haven't really meditated that much, and then they go on like a 10-day meditation retreat, they're mostly on their own, like things can get really trippy. Like if you all of a sudden just do that, like you radically increase your dosage, or if you all of a sudden go, and I'm sure Ash and Irene could tell stories about like newbies who go to these hours-long ecstatic pagan rituals, and like some wacky adventures ensue. Just like if you radically increase the dosage of a medicine like psilocybin, or if you radically increase the dosage on any standard medication, if you double or triple it, like your just standard meditation, different things are going to happen. So if you want to start playing around in the deep end of the spiritual swimming pool, and I would say consider it. It's real interesting to swim in the deep end versus the kiddie pool. If you want to learn to skillfully trust and let go and float in the vast open waters of the spiritual ocean of reality, I strongly recommend having an experienced spiritual teacher as a guide, or some kind of really skilled support group of fellow travelers. In Buddhism, we call it a sangha, and other, in Unitarian Universalism, we call it a congregation. You don't have to do this stuff alone, and different world religions have different names for these groups. This past week, we celebrated as a country Independence Day. It's vital that we not devolve backward into dependence, like the United States president becoming a monarch, or other related trends toward authoritarianism that our Supreme Court seems eager to make possible. But to hear more about that, come back next week. Steve's going to be preaching on You, the Vote. I'll be here as well, so we're going to talk about that next week. My point for now is that the real path forward is not fixating on the independence that was achieved more than 2 centuries ago, although that's great. The real path forward is how we work forward together to co-create a new paradigm shift toward greater interdependence. It's not just celebrating independence. And related to all we've been talking about, I don't want us to miss that it's one thing to just think that that interdependent web of all existence is a good idea. It is quite another when spiritual experiences give you a felt existential experience of what it's like for self and world to merge, and for your sort of sense of self to drop away. So during the minute of silent meditation, I'm going to leave up this slide for you to reflect on your own experiences of when your sense of self may have slipped away, if only for a few minutes, whether that's a state of creative flow, or flow during an athletic event, or awe at nature, or maybe some mystical or drug experiences. I don't know your life. A profound piece of indigenous wisdom puts it this way about the power of interdependence. If you have come here to help me from the sense of separateness, right, the sense of ego, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you deeply sense that your liberation is bound up with my liberation, then let us work together. Truly realizing our interdependence at a deep existential level can make all the difference in the world. And I'm grateful to be on that journey with all of you of spiritual growth and exploration.
I have very low blood pressure. It's a hereditary trait. I haven't done anything particularly virtuous to deserve it. One of my favorite things is salty food. But this trait runs in my family. I get it from my father's side. Low blood pressure has some funny side effects, including occasionally seeing little sparkling flashes of light, particularly if someone with low blood pressure stands up too quickly. The way I experience it, it looks a little bit like flecks of glitter drifting around me for a moment. I was raised on fairy tales, Narnia, Tolkien books, and Jim Henson shows and movies, so as a child, the most logical conclusion when that happened was that I was seeing fairies. It made sense at the time. Years later, I was talking to my mother about some of my blood pressure issues and told her that when I was little, I thought the sparks of light were fairies. And she paused for a moment and then said, maybe they were. The conversation stayed with me, as you can see. And just for context, my mom is a left-brain dominant community organizer from an engineering family. She is most known for a logic-driven style of thinking. Healthy mysticism is the ability to experience a layer of reality that falls outside of rational, logical explanations without losing one's grip on the practical, mundane world. It's a way of allowing magic and wonder to inform and elevate the experience of living. A healthy connection to mysticism also means that when we do have a big experience that doesn't conform to the rules of reality as we know them, we're better able to address that experience and find constructive ways to process it, to make it make sense for us. The way my mother phrased it was effective. Maybe there's more to life than the logical explanation. Allowing a mystical layer to reality doesn't mean we reject the mundane underpinnings. I have low blood pressure, and seeing stars is a symptom that goes along with it. A mystical mindset is simply a lived pluralism, a way of approaching the world that includes a both-and philosophy. I have low blood pressure, and I am an adult in my mid-40s who has spent the last 25 years as a teacher of mystical and magical practices through pagan spirituality. If anyone was going to encounter some wild magic flickering in their peripheral vision during childhood, it is someone like me. Perhaps there was more happening. Perhaps that was one of the ways the Great Mystery could reach me as a child, so it did. Both and. Science and mystery. As the New Inspiration Statement says in our new UU Values and Covenant, we draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. We live in a culture that as a whole is uncomfortable with mysticism outside a very narrow set of parameters. For most of us, our first instinct when hearing about someone else's mystical experience is to deny it or to try to rationalize it. This is part of why people tell children to stop daydreaming when they say something that seems unusual. One of the most common reasons people turn up in the classes I teach and ceremonies I lead is that they're trying to reconnect with some of how they experienced the world as children. They miss the mystery that got crushed out of them. Since the Enlightenment period, mysticism has been widely regarded as dangerous and potentially evil. This wasn't always the case, though. You only have to skim the writings of the Catholic Saint Teresa to see that mysticism once had a respected place, even in religions that are not known for mystical thinking now. The Age of Enlightenment and its focus on reason and logic was a gift in a world that too often took mystical information to an extreme. The last execution for witchcraft in Britain occurred in 1727, just as the Enlightenment period was beginning. We needed a healthy dose of logic at that time. However, good things can still be taken to an extreme. One of the many functions of religion is to offer various frameworks for spiritual experiences. Enlightenment thinking caused mysticism to be stripped out of most forms of Christianity and many of the Western belief systems that emerged since then. Religions can be beautiful containers for spirituality, but without the mystery, wonder, and transcendental experiences that often go along with spiritual practice, we end up with a beautiful container that doesn't hold anything, a vase with no flowers. One of the other common reasons people end up in my classes and ceremonies is because they feel that their faith of origin is empty or meaningless, a structure without purpose or greater connection, a container holding nothing, a remnant of course-correcting a religious structure may be a little too hard. We can begin to reclaim healthy mysticism by opening to a gray area within our experiences. It's okay to not always have a logical explanation for everything that happens to us. Those experiences can live in that gray area. The truth is there really are some things that are not replicable in a laboratory setting with double-blind protocols or able to be dissected in a petri dish. We need to be able to reclaim the idea of mystery and have it as its own category in our experiences. This is where you can put things like ghostly encounters, times when it felt like wild animals were trying to give you a message, omens that occurred in your life and then had something occur that supported the omen, seeing the future in dreams, senses of a powerful presence in certain places, or any number of other messages and encounters. There are so very many ways humans experience the numinous, and simply allowing those moments to have a home within the category of mystical experience is incredibly helpful. The world doesn't always have to make sense. Indeed, sometimes it's better if it doesn't. We can cultivate mysticism in a healthy way as well. As with so many areas of life, healthy mysticism involves the intentional selection of a middle path, an approach that holds mystery in one hand and pragmatism in the other. There are some useful tools when it comes to this middle path. The first is to remember that a mystical experience is a kind of stimuli that doesn't generally occur frequently and involves parts of our brains that aren't entirely set up for contact with the numinous. As earthly beings, the majority of our neural wiring is for the survival of this experience of being incarnated. When we communicate a mystical experience, we're trying to put words around something bigger than language can hold, the ineffability Carl mentioned earlier. It often includes feelings and experiences we don't even have language for. Our experiences are also filtered through the lens of our lives and cultures. The myth cycles of the world's religions were originally someone's mystical experience that got written down. Taking those writings literally is one of the problems with religious fundamentalism of all stripes. Encounters of the greater mystery do not translate well and are always flawed when in written form simply by virtue of having to be translated in the first place. Holding that gray area of mystical experience gently and exploring but not fully dissecting it is a good middle path. We can contemplate something without completely interrogating it, allowing soft edges and some feelings and images that simply cannot be spoken about clearly is a good approach. Another useful thing to be aware of when we're processing a mystical experience are our thought patterns. Most of us have some areas where we can be a little self-destructive. As an example, I have a tendency to overcommit. My desire to help means that I have to manage that impulse carefully so I don't end up overscheduled, exhausted, and sick. I think of this part of my psyche as superhero syndrome. This means that when I have a mystical experience that feels like a call to action, I know to hold that experience gently in my mind. Some of the message is probably true, but my helium hand tendencies can act up in really unhelpful ways. Awareness of our own destructive traits means we can put a mystical experience through a logic filter without completely losing the experience. It just means using two categories when processing: mystery and mindset. What parts of my ego or what self-destructive tendencies are getting in the way of this experience? Likewise, healthy mysticism respects boundaries. As I frequently tell my students, if you have an experience that seems to be telling you to act in malicious or dishonorable ways, or in ways that will harm you, it's safe to ascribe that experience to some of the less helpful parts of your psyche. Creating space in your spiritual practice for healthy mysticism and for experiences that can begin to take up that gray area category is also largely intentional. It is possible to have a transcendental experience while standing in line at the grocery store, but it's not likely. I do know someone it happened to, but it's not likely. As someone who deliberately seeks encounters with the numinous, I put myself into situations where they are more likely. For starters, I spend a lot of time outside. And when I do so, I open to messages and experiences of mystery. This means that when I'm watering the garden in the morning, I view it as a meditative activity. I greet my land spirits and I tell them how beautiful they are, and how grateful I am for all the flowers and fruit and vegetables that are growing. I listen to the bird song and I allow my vision to be soft. I place myself into a receptive state. I'm open to the possibility that there is more present in the land that I belong to than the physical shapes and forms around me. When I go hiking or on an adventure outdoors, I carry offerings with me. Depending on where you're going, an offering can be as simple as sharing some of the water from your water bottle. One of my preferred offerings is tiny chips of amber, local to the East Coast. The kind I use comes from the New Jersey area. When I encounter a particularly beautiful or evocative place, I pause to leave an offering in gratitude to the spirits there. What's interesting is that sometimes that simple act opens the way to a mystical experience. One of my favorite parks in Maryland is Swallow Falls State Park. It's out near Deep Creek, and if you haven't been there yet, I do highly recommend it. It has several absolutely stunning waterfalls. It's just gorgeous. My spouse and I were there for my birthday a few years ago, and the day was overcast. I went to make an offering, as I usually do. I was standing just next to the flow of a waterfall and placed a small chip of amber into my hand. And I was contemplating the amber and all that I was grateful for in that moment, and a single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds to illuminate just the inside of my hand. And when I released the stone into the water, the light faded, and the sky again was a solid wall of clouds. Sure, there's a logical explanation we could go with, and perhaps while I was reaching out with gratitude, the very spirits I was offering to reached back with a touch of grace and light. Both and weather patterns and mystery. Another technique for allowing some mysticism into your life is omen seeking. When I am struggling with a decision or a complicated situation, I often bring in elements of mystery to help me untangle the thread. This can take the form of going for a walk and noticing what species and plants are most present. It can be a direct invitation to the powers that be to help me through my current struggle and a request that they speak to me through the nature around me. If the weather isn't conducive toward outdoor omen seeking, I will light a candle or incense and observe the smoke or flame. When I do so, I soften my mind and gaze, allowing myself to see images and patterns and then draw connections from them. Is it the air currents in my house? Yeah, sure. And also, it's a way for the great mystery to reach me. Both and. One of my favorite quotes about modern-day mystics is that we see color and texture where others see nothing. We hear music where others hear only silence. We feel presence where others feel isolation. It is a beautiful thing to live in such a rich world. It informs a sense of purpose and connection and supports a life that is aligned to a robust spirituality. So, consider adding a little gray area to your life. Be open to the possibility that there's more to the world than what you see at the surface. Get a little more comfortable with the idea that not everything that happens can be explained logically or put into words at all. Go out and see what messages are waiting for you. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll see some fairies too. Please rise in body or spirit to join in singing hymn number 1003. We're going to sing it through twice.
Irene's sermon, I think she's exactly right that these mystical experiences can happen kind of anywhere, anytime. There's a famous saying in the Buddhist tradition that awakening experiences are accidents and that meditation makes us accident prone. And you can, kind of substitute, going to pagan rituals makes us accident prone or whatever. And I want to give you one example of that. Some of you will know how these things can truly happen anywhere, because I think sometimes we think, well, I just can't have a mystical experience because I'm way too busy, I don't have enough money, I can't just go sit on a mountain for, 3 years or whatever. So the famous quote from the Trappist monk Thomas Merton, some of you will know about one of his most profound mystical experiences, happened in all places in Louisville, Kentucky, standing on the corner of 4th and Walnut. And if you're there, you can go, there's a sign that says this quote I'm about to read about this. So I'm just going to read this, just a few sentences. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people. In Louisville, Kentucky, I loved all these people. I'm from South Carolina, I can say that. Bless their hearts. I loved all these people, and this is the separateness to interdependence. I realized that they are mine, and I theirs, and that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness. That's waking up. Waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference, this is what Einstein was talking about. It was such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me now that I realize what we all are. And if only everyone could realize this, but it cannot be explained. That's what I was saying. You can't just think intellectually that it's a good idea. You really have to get it. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Luminous beings are we, said Yoda, right? It's true. It's true. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depth of their hearts that neither sin nor desire for self-knowledge can reach, beyond ego. The core of the reality, the person that each one of us is. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty and greed. But this cannot be seen. It can only be understood, almost as if you stumble backward into it. The final thing I'll leave you with this polarity that Irene was talking about, of how we have to, that when people first have some of these experiences, you may have seen this in yourself or others, they sometimes say, well, I just need to then spend all my time there. And there's a famous saying that Ram Dass used to tell people when they're like, I just want to meditate all the time and, and not do anything out in the world or with other people. He used to say, you have to remember your Buddha nature and you have to remember your zip code. like both and, because it's like if you just spend all this time meditating and then you get evicted from your apartment, you're like, wait, but I'm like fully self-actualized or whatever. It's like, it really is a both and, like Irene was talking about. So as you go out into the world, continue your journey with love. Care for one another, because we truly are connected. Whatever is happening to me is happening to you, and vice versa. It's the Ubuntu truth of I am because we are. Continue your journey in love. Care for one another. Care for this one earth. Do justice. Make peace. And as you go, whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place of hope, of love, of peace or joy, any insight into maybe how life can be different from shifting from dependence to independence to interdependence. That goes with you out into the world. We are different for having spent this time together. May you live boldly. May you live with thanksgiving.